Hi, I'm Kate.
I'm Addy.
And for this project, I chose the article Change in Fish in Benthic Communities in Belizean Patch Reefs in and outside of a marine reserve across a parrotfish capture ban. And it was authored by McClanahan and Mutinga. So in this paper, the authors primarily investigated the effect of a fishing ban on a key grazing species, parrotfish, and the consequential effects on coral health and overall species composition on the reef. So grazing species are herbivorous fish and invertebrates that are critical in maintaining health of corals as they prevent the overgrowth of macroalgae that cause water hypoxia, and they are also competition for zooxanthellae, which are the symbiotic microalgae that provide hard/stony corals with 70 to 90% of their energy. So the total number of large parrotfish did not differ significantly between the fished and the non-fished areas in the study. However, the fishing ban allowed for more predatory fish to grow in population, which may explain why the parrotfish population did not grow as quickly or as largely as predicted. Overall herbivory was also nearly identical between the two sites. So right here I have my little graph. And if you can see, right here is the total parrotfish amount, which did not change very much. And down here are also some more grazing species on the reef, and their populations did not differ very much. But here you can see these are some predatory species, and their population grew significantly after the fishing ban took place. Overall, over this 22-year study, the researchers saw more species composition changes in the fish populations than an overall increase in benthic coral cover of coral, and they attributed this to the coral mortality events in both 1998 and 2010, where Glover's Reef, Belize, experienced mass bleaching due to heat stressors that were out of the study's control. Overall, the authors discussed the importance of coral reefs in the larger oceanic ecosystems and how the loss of these vital organisms will likely be at the hands of several anthropogenic stressors, such as global warming, overfishing, and pollution, rather than just a single cause.
Okay, so how does increasing eutrophication and nitrogen levels in the ocean contribute to coral death?
Yeah, so as I said before, macroalgae, which can be spurred to grow when there is increased eutrophication and fertilizer runoff, which includes a lot of nitrogen into waterways, it causes these huge macroalgae blooms that end up, like I said, causing water hypoxia and also creating competition and shading for other organisms like the zooxanthellae that live inside coral, and the coral dependent on them. So really, with more eutrophication, it can seriously damage the coral reef habitats.
So the article I looked at is titled Ghost Fishing Impacts on Hydrocorals and Associated Reef Assemblages by Benelli and colleagues. The focus is on ghost fishing, which is when gear like lines or nets get caught, lost or abandoned in the ocean, and how it impacts corals and reef fish, specifically the branching hydrocoral Mellipora. Okay, so we already know ghost fishing harms big animals like turtles and dolphins. That's common knowledge, but this study wanted to look closer at very small but important species to the reef. Researchers were asking, if more fishing line gets tangled on these hydrocorals, does that lead to higher coral death? And will it mess with the fish that live around them? Like in terms of how many fish there are, how many species, how they behave. So they studied 30 different coral colonies. For each one, they measured how much fishing line was tangled up in it, how big the coral was, and how much of it was dead. Then they used underwater videos to track the fish, looking at how many there were, how many species, and how they acted, especially how they fed. They ran statistical models to help connect all of this. Now the figure shows strong positive relationship between the fishing line and the colony mortality. There she is. You can see the correlation and the upwards curve with the relationship there. They found the more line that's tangled, the more coral dies. That supports their main hypothesis. So basically they were right. Fish abundance and species richness didn't really change with the presence of the fishing line. So it didn't scare the fish away or reduce numbers. But one key behavior that did change was the feeding. Fish weren't feeding as much when fishing lines were around. It's subtle but super important. Ghost fishing hurts coral directly, and it also disrupts important fish behaviors, feeding. Fish aren't disappearing yet, but the way they interact with the reef is changing, and that could lead to long-term damage in the ecosystem. The models were statistically strong, so the inference here is solid. Ghost fishing is already having real impacts, even if they're not always visible at first glance.
Okay, one question for you. So how does reef damage affect water quality on a broader scale, like in terms of like the hydrosphere?
It's got a huge impact. Basically, when corals die, they stop filtering the water and producing the calcium carbonate that helps build the reef structure, and that loss can lead to more sedimentation in the water, reducing the amount of light that goes into the water and affecting the photosynthesis in the organisms that rely on that. And fish feed less, and there's less grazing on algae, and all of that disrupts the nutrient cycling that reefs help regulate. Even though ghost fishing might seem like a super localized issue, it impacts everywhere because fishing is everywhere. And it affects the chemistry and the quality of the surrounding water and altering how the hydrosphere supports life in those areas over time.
If there's one thing you could take away from this virtual presentation, it should be that fishing, especially near reefs, which are the most biodiverse marine ecosystems on the planet, is very harmful, not just for the benthic species like corals, but also for the fish species that live there. And the loss of both of these critical parts of our marine ecosystems have larger outcomes and larger consequences than just the designated area where the fishing is occurring. Coral reef habitats provide nurseries for juvenile fish, which later move on to different parts of the ocean, and they provide critical ecosystem services that we humans also depend on. So, in order to protect our coral reefs, we must cut back on fishing.
Branching coral.